Well, I ended the first book right after Cindy's death, and a message that she had given me regarding those men. And I pick up kind of from there, and I cover my time on board with the angelic beings. I cover the numbers, which is a chapter in itself, the numbers that I was given, and my continuing conversations with the chief that are off the chart. He has told me that there was a full military investigation done that night. He told me that they came from Arizona or New Mexico, and that they came in from the Air Force. And I am starting to get memories of my father screaming for me to get into my bedroom when the Novi police escorted them to my house, up my driveway. I watched them out my bedroom window. The chief had the police lights on as he escorted those men to my house. And I remember my father very loud and screaming. They wanted to talk to me, a 12-year-old child. My father was irate. He threatened to kill them. They left. I remember being taken to stay with some people. And I remember the last name of the people. And I thought, oh, this is just a dream. Their last name was Sheehy. I remember the house. I remember my mother taking me. And I just found out just 2 months ago that these people really do exist. I am in touch with cousins that I had been in touch with for decades. And I said, I remember my mom dropping me off at this stranger's house. The last name was Sheehy. And she said, oh, yes, those were friends of your Grandma Shinjak's. In fact, she helped raise one of their sons. And I said, oh my God, it was real. And my dad was sent to California. My father was an aerospace. He was a hydraulic engineer in the aerospace division of Vickers in Troy, Michigan. And he never went away on a business trip, ever, not once. And he was sent to California. And this was all during that time in '91. And the reason my mother dropped me off at these people's house was to get me out of Novi for a while. They honestly hoped that I would forget this event. And the military did tell my father to silence me. That's why my father shook me and told me that this was a secret and I wasn't allowed to speak of it. And that's when he shared that information about Skinny Bob with me, an alien that had been captured. And my father used the word captured when he described this Skinny Bob. And I remember telling him, that's terrible, because I said captured. I just thought that was such a horrible thing to do, capturing this alien and nicknaming him Skinny Bob. I was so angry. We were bullies then, and we're still bullies. It still sickens me to think of it. But my father gave me this information for a reason, and I was, for now, because he knew it would come in, it would be of use to me in the future, and it is. You know, my father told me about Skinny Bob in 1961, and there was nothing on the computer. Skinny Bob was never even heard of until 2011, and that's when I was awakened. So all of these synchronicities, before my mother got home. And I remember now that when I got home, it was 10 to 9, because I remember looking at the clock on the stove. And I remember looking at the clock on the stove while my father and I were my father was kneeling down on the floor of the kitchen. And he had his arms wrapped around me so tight. I was always his favorite, and there was never a secret about that. And after that event, I was more than ever his favorite. And he was so protective of me. He was overly protective. I was grounded all the time, and I realize now it was because he wanted to know where I was. He was so strict. And I remember him shaking me and telling me, "You cannot mention this. You cannot." And I knew I couldn't, and I didn't. And I stored these memories in the back of my head in a safe place where no one could reach them, not even a therapist. You know, I went to therapists over the years because of my anxiety and my post-traumatic stress disorder. And I never, ever, ever mentioned that 1961, not to a husband, not to a boyfriend, not to a family member. I did draw that picture of the ship and everything. And over the years, I did show it to my daughter when she was young and through the years, but she got bored with it and said, "Mother, I know, I've seen it." So I quit drawing it, and I would just draw it for myself after that. So outside of my daughter, no one had ever seen the drawings that I did over all those years until I confronted Cindy in 2011 with what I believe were 3 illustrations I had at that time. I set up an appointment to go to her house, and I was armed with those 3 illustrations because over the years there were probably 5 or maybe 10 times that I had tried to bring up the subject of that night in 1961. And all I would have to say is, "Cindy, can we talk about," and her whole body would shake, and she would put her hand up like this to stop me. And I stopped. One time I said to her, "I just want to know if it happened." And she said, "It happened, and I'm not going to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it." And that was it, until I finally got her to speak in 2011 when I came armed with those 3 illustrations, and I locked the 2 of us in the spare bedroom and set her down on the bed, and one by one I would produce each illustration. And when I pulled out the first illustration, her whole body started to tremble, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I was so angry and so determined that she was going to talk about it that I produced a second picture and I tapped on it, demanding her to look at it. And she said, "Oh my God, I remember this. I remember it like it was yesterday." And she said, "You were gone. You were missing. We couldn't find you." Now, I was hearing these words for the first time. And I said, "I was gone. I was gone." I said, "What were the first words that I said to you when you spoke to me?" And she said, "You told me you were in outer space." Now, those are certainly the words of a 12-year-old. And I remember that that night was the last time that in 61, that was the last time Cindy and I ever spoke of that night. And my dad didn't even want, Cindy's father was insistent that Cindy see that I was home and that I was okay. So my father agreed that he could bring Cindy over to the house. And I remember we were hugging, and she was so happy that I was okay. She was on board for a very short period of time, and it was to appease me. They had put her in this cylindrical tube. Well, they did the tests on me, and she remembered being in that cylindrical tube. So she validated everything that I remembered. And shortly before she died in 2015, she had a regression with my regression therapist on my same couch, and I recorded it. And her words pretty much mirrored mine. So I'm glad that I did get her to have a regression.